Breaking the chains of silence, how one voice can ignite a revolution. Welcome to an extraordinary journey of courage, resilience, and the unstoppable power of the human spirit. Today, we're diving deep into a topic that touches the very core of our existence, the power of breaking silence. I'm thrilled to share with you the profound insights and life-changing wisdom I've gained from an extraordinary individual who has dedicated her life to being a voice for the voiceless. I recently had the privilege of interviewing Stephanie Walker, the visionary founder of I Am No Longer Silent. Stephanie isn't just an advocate. She's a force of nature, a beacon of hope for countless individuals trapped in the darkness of their unspoken truths. Her work has sparked a global movement, challenging us all to confront the silence that perpetuates injustice and to embrace the transformative power of our voices. Imagine for a moment a world where every voice, no matter how small or trembling, has the power to shake the foundations of injustice and ignite a revolution of change. This isn't just a dream. It's the reality Stephanie Walker is fighting to create every single day. As I sat across from Stephanie, I couldn't help but be struck by the raw power of her presence. Her eyes blazed with a fierce determination that seemed to ignite the very air around us. Here was a woman who had not just survived her past, she had alchemized her pain into purpose, transforming her silence into a rallying cry for justice that echoes around the globe. Stephanie's journey from survivor to advocate is more than just inspiring. It's a testament to the indomitable human spirit and the earth-shattering power of finding one's voice. But let me tell you, folks, this isn't your typical rags to riches, triumph over adversity story. No, Stephanie's tale is grittier, more complex, and infinitely more powerful than that. Growing up, Stephanie witnessed firsthand the harsh realities of pain, suffering, and inequality. She saw how fear could suffocate words, how shame could bury truths that deserved to be spoken. But instead of succumbing to the silence that threatened to engulf her, Stephanie made a choice that would not only change her life, but the lives of countless others. She chose to speak. Now, I know what you're thinking. Speaking up, that's it? That's the big revelation? But hold on to your seats, because speaking up is rarely as simple as opening one's mouth and letting the words flow. For Stephanie, and for so many others, breaking the silence meant confronting deep-seated fears, challenging societal norms, and risking everything for the sake of truth. It meant standing tall in the face of those who would rather see her silenced and extending a hand to those still trapped in the shadows of their own unspoken truths. It meant looking fear in the eye and saying, "Not today, Satan, not today." As Stephanie shared her experiences with me, I was struck by a profound realization. Silence is not just the absence of sound. It's the presence of fear, shame, and oppression. It's a tool used by those in power to maintain the status quo, to keep the marginalized on the fringes, and to perpetuate cycles of abuse and injustice. But what happens when we refuse to be silenced? What happens when we reclaim our voices and use them as instruments of change? Well, let me tell you, worlds shift, mountains move, and revolutions are born. This is the question that drives Stephanie's work with I'm no longer silent. It's not just a hashtag or a social media movement. It's a revolution of the human spirit. It's a call to arms for every person who has ever felt powerless, invisible, or unheard. It's a reminder that our stories matter, that our pain deserves acknowledgement, and that our voices have the power to reshape the world. But breaking the silence is just the beginning. And Stephanie explained to me, true advocacy goes beyond simply speaking out. It requires action, commitment, and a willingness to stand in the gap for those who cannot yet stand for themselves. It means creating safe spaces where survivors can share their stories without fear of judgment or retribution. It means challenging the systems and structures that perpetuate silence and building networks of support that empower others to find their voices. Stephanie's work as an author, featured in Gumbo for the Soul of Black Women, further illustrates the power of storytelling as a tool for healing and empowerment. As she described the process of sharing her story alongside other powerful voices of resilience and strength, I was reminded of the ripple effect that one person's courage can have. Each story shared becomes a lifeline for someone else, a beacon of hope in the darkness of their own struggles. But make no mistake, the path of an advocate is not an easy one. Stephanie spoke candidly about the challenges she faces, the moments of doubt and exhaustion that threaten to overwhelm her. Yet it's in these moments that the true strength of her character shines through. She draws renewed energy from the stories of those who have found healing through sharing from the resilience of survivors and from the unwavering spirit of those determined to reclaim their power. Let me share with you a story that Stephanie told me, one that illustrates the transformative power of breaking silence in a way that statistics and theories never could. It's a story about a young woman, let's call her Sarah, who attended one of Stephanie's speaking engagements. Sarah had been carrying the weight of her own unspoken trauma for years. She had buried it deep, convinced that if she just pushed it down far enough, it would disappear. But trauma, my friends, is not like a child's toy that can be shoved under the bed and forgotten. It's more like a beach ball held underwater. The harder you try to submerge it, the more forcefully it wants to burst to the surface. As Sarah listened to Stephanie speak, something inside her began to shift. It was as if Stephanie's words were keys, unlocking doors within Sarah that had been bolted shut for years. After the talk, Sarah approached Stephanie, tears streaming down her face, and whispered 5 words that would change her life. I thought I was alone. In that moment, a chain of silence that had bound Sarah for years began to crumble. Through her tears, she began to share her own story, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. As Stephanie listened, offering nothing but compassion and understanding, she witnessed a transformation. Sarah's shoulders straightened, her voice grew stronger, and a spark of hope ignited in her eyes. This, Stephanie told me, is why she continues to fight. Because in every story shared, in every voice that rises from the ashes of silence, there is the potential for healing, for connection, and for change. It's a reminder that our words have power, not just to break our own chains, but to shatter the bonds that hold others captive. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. That's all well and good for Sarah, but my situation is different. My silence protects me, it keeps me safe. And to that I say, I hear you, I see you, and I challenge you to consider this. What if your silence, which feels like a shield, is actually a cage? Stephanie shared another story with me, one that challenges our perceptions of safety and silence. It's about a man we'll call John, a successful businessman who seemed to have it all together on the surface. John had a secret he'd been carrying for decades, a childhood trauma he'd never spoken about to anyone. He convinced himself that his silence was a strength, that by never acknowledging what had happened, he was somehow winning. But the truth was, his silence was slowly poisoning every aspect of his life. His relationships were superficial, his anxiety was through the roof, and he felt a constant gnawing emptiness that no amount of success could fill. John stumbled across Hash, I Am No Longer Silent, by chance, and something about the stories he read there resonated with him. For the first time, he began to question whether his silence was really serving him. It took time and it wasn't easy, but John eventually found the courage to speak his truth, first to a therapist, then to his partner, and finally to a support group of fellow survivors. The process of breaking his silence was painful, messy, and at times terrifying. But on the other side of that fear, John found something he never expected: freedom. By giving voice to his experiences, he began to reclaim the parts of himself he'd locked away. His relationships deepened, his anxiety lessened, and that gnawing emptiness began to fill with purpose and connection. John's story reminds us that sometimes what we think is keeping us safe is actually holding us back. Our silence can become a prison of our own making, and breaking that silence, while scary, can be the key to our liberation as we navigate a world that often seeks to diminish or dismiss the experiences of marginalized voices. Stephanie's work serves as a beacon of hope and a call to action. She challenges us to examine our own silences, to question the narratives we've been taught to accept, and to use our voices as instruments of change. But how do we begin? How do we find the courage to speak our truths in a world that often seems determined to silence us? Stephanie offers these words of wisdom. Start small, she says. Start with a whisper if you have to. Write your truth in a journal. Share it with a trusted friend or join a support group. The act of giving voice to your experiences, even in the smallest ways, begins to chip away at the walls of silence that have held you captive. She emphasizes the importance of creating safe spaces, both for ourselves and for others. Surround yourself with people who uplift and support you, she advises, and be that safe space for someone else. Sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to listen without judgment to change someone's life. Stephanie also stresses the power of education and awareness. Knowledge is a weapon against silence, she says. Learn about the issues that affect your community, understand the systems that perpetuate injustice. The more we know, the better equipped we are to speak truth to power. But perhaps most importantly, Stephanie reminds us of the power of persistence. Breaking silence is not a one time event, she explains. It's a continuous process of speaking up, standing firm, and refusing to be silenced. There will be setbacks, there will be days when it feels easier to retreat into silence. But every time you choose to speak, you grow stronger, you become more resilient. Now, I want to share with you one last story, a story that illustrates the ripple effect of breaking silence and how one voice can truly change the world. This is the story of Maria, a domestic worker who had endured years of abuse and exploitation at the hands of her employers. Maria's situation is sadly not unique. Millions of domestic workers around the world face similar conditions, their struggles often hidden behind the closed doors of private homes. Maria had always believed that speaking up would only make things worse. She feared losing her job, being deported, or facing retaliation. But one day, she heard about a local organization that was fighting for domestic workers' rights. Inspired by the stories of other workers who had spoken out, Maria made the brave decision to share her own experiences. What happened next was nothing short of extraordinary. Maria's story, combined with those of other workers, led to a grassroots movement that caught the attention of local lawmakers. Over time, this movement grew, gaining momentum and support. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, opposition, and moments of doubt. But Maria and her fellow advocates persisted. After years of tireless advocacy, their efforts paid off. New legislation was passed, providing better protections for domestic workers in their state. Maria's single act of breaking her silence had set in motion a chain of events that improved the lives of thousands of workers. This story reminds us that our voices have power beyond what we can imagine. When we break our silence, we're not just speaking for ourselves, we're potentially speaking for countless others who share our experiences but haven't yet found their voice. As we near the end of our time together, I want to leave you with a challenge. I want you to think about the silences in your own life. What truths are you hiding? What injustices are you witnessing without speaking up? What voices are you failing to amplify? Now, imagine for a moment what might happen if you broke that silence. Imagine the chains that could be broken, the lives that could be changed, the world that could be reshaped, all because you found the courage to speak. I'm not saying it will be easy. Breaking silence rarely is. But I am saying it will be worth it because your voice matters. Your story deserves to be heard, and your truth has the power to change the world. So I ask you, what silence will you break today? What truth will you speak? How will you use your voice to create the change you wish to see in the world? Remember, in the words of Stephanie Walker, we are no longer silent. We are no longer afraid. We are resilient, powerful, and unbreakable. As we conclude this talk, I want to leave you with this thought. Silence may seem safe, but it's in our voices that we find true freedom. It's in our stories that we find connection. And it's in our collective truths that we find the power to reshape our world. So speak up, speak out. Break the chains of silence that have held you and others captive for far too long. Because your voice is not just powerful, it's revolutionary. And the revolution begins with you. Thank you.